We're going to give you a bit of a background of the game and basically what it's about quite briefly, and also just talk through how to run it logistically, because I know there's a lot of notes there, just to make sure you're all clear on that. We'll briefly touch on scoring as well, just because I know it's something that people find a bit more difficult. So I'm going to run you through those three things, and then Sally will have a look at observing and debriefing. So I know that someone's just mentioned on the call that there's a fair bit of background chatter. So if any of you, because that will allow other people to hear a bit clearer. So hopefully that's okay. So in terms of the background of the game, what this is based on is the idea of the prisoner's dilemma. For those of you who haven't heard of that, I'm just going to run through it, so bear with me if it's something you're aware of. And this is something that comes from game theory, which is just a way of studying kind of how human beings make decisions and how rational they are in different types of scenarios. And within the prisoner's dilemma, two prisoners are given the option of either betraying each other or staying silent. So they've both been arrested, essentially, and if both of them choose to stay silent, they'll serve 1 year in prison. But if they both betray each other, they'll serve 2 years. So in this quite simple scenario, you can see that it's preferable for both of them to stay silent, because that's 1 year in prison is better than 2. However, what is kind of introduced is a third option, and that is that if one prisoner chooses to stay silent, but the other one betrays them, that prisoner who stays silent will be given 3 years in prison, and the prisoner who betrays them will go free. And so there's the most to gain suddenly in this game by betraying someone, because then you won't go to prison at all. But that also means you're giving someone else the harshest sentence. So the game is around not being able to predict the behavior of other people, and it means that the choice is a really big gamble. And so people will make the decision on whether to betray or not based on a number of kind of different factors, all of which are uncertain. That's kind of what makes the game interesting. So it's whether how much you trust the other person, whether morally you are able to betray someone, you feel that that's something that you can do or that you're willing to do. It's also about trying to predict what the other prisoner will do. So the kind of train of thought is, well, they're probably going to betray me, so then I should betray them. But then if that happens, I'm going to go to prison. And you kind of get yourself into a bit of a difficult scenario where you can't work out what that other person is going to do. And then this game was kind of later developed into what was called the iterated prisoner's dilemma, which is basically playing this game several times in succession. And in that scenario, what begins to happen is you use prior understanding of the way that person normally acts to predict what they're going to do in the future, and therefore you change your gameplay. Obviously, what that means is the other person is doing exactly the same thing. So they're obviously looking at what you're doing and also trying to change their gameplay in order to win. So Red and Blue, the game, is basically based on that, and the theory is broadly the same. Obviously, no prison sentences, but other than that, basically the same. So within that game, if both teams choose blue, then they both win and they'll gain 3 points. If they both choose red, they'll both lose. But if one chooses red and the other chooses blue, so essentially whoever chooses red is betraying the other team and gambling on the other team not having made the same choice, they'll win big, essentially. They'll win the most amount of points and will force the other team to lose the most amount of points. So the game itself is kind of based on predicting other people's actions and deciding about taking either a moral or immoral course. But then as you play through multiple rounds, as you've seen in the notes, you'll play this 10 times, you will start to kind of create a strategy yourself, but also try and predict the strategy of the other team. And what this game also does is add a few extra layers into that, one of which being the idea of being able to have a meeting. That kind of adds more trust and distrust, because you have to make a decision about whether you trust the other team, how trustworthy you appear. You have to kind of decide whether you want to trick someone in person, which can be more difficult than when they're just in 2 separate rooms. And also there's the option of kind of winning big. So in 3 of the rounds, you can choose your score will be multiplied by a certain number. And we'll go through that in a minute with the scoring. But that means that you're more likely to win a lot more if you betray someone, and can kind of change you from being someone who was saying, oh no, I won't betray them, to suddenly being like, well, actually, I'd win if I did it in this round. And then you might do something different or out of character. So that's just a little bit on the background of the game quite quickly. So I'll pause for questions there. Is there anything anyone wanted to know about the background of the game and how that works? I'll take silence for there not being any questions, and I can move on to scoring. Sally, do you have anything you wanted to add on to that and kind of the background and how that
Yeah, I think
works?
so. I think that's a great description
Okay,
as an overview. Yeah.
great. Um,
Yep.
so I think the running of the game is something that's a bit more, can be slightly more challenging. But essentially, it's about being quite clear at the beginning and just reading out those instructions on the facilitator notes as exactly as possible. So it's basically got a script for you there. So just read those out and be quite stern about the amount of times that you repeat it, the instructions about the objective of the game, and just in terms of not answering questions and that sort of thing, you can just continue to be quite stern. And then what you're going to do is play 10 rounds of red or blue. So first off, you just need to split your group into teams A and B. Up to you really how you decide to do that, and it might be worth checking with the PEMs on the day because they might have already split them into groups for you, or it might just be you'll kind of split the room in half. Doesn't really matter who's in each team, and they'll have their instructions separately. And within each 10 rounds, essentially they'll be given 5 minutes to plan and decide what they're going to play, and essentially all you have to find out is whether they're going to play red or blue at the end of that 5 minutes, and then you'll need to consult with the other team, find out what they've played, and then give them their score. So if both teams have played blue, then they'd get 3 points. If both teams have played red, they lose 3 points, for example. You just need to kind of coordinate getting what both team have played. And then the only key bits really aside from that is just kind of rinsing and repeating and doing the same thing, is apart from after round 4 and round 8, there's the opportunity for teams to hold a conference. In my experience, every time we've played this, people have wanted to have one, but there are some rules within that conference, and that is that both teams need to agree to have that conference or it won't happen. So again, you just need to work with your co-facilitator to make sure you know whether they both want to have a conference and then organise it. And within the conference, they must choose a captain, and only that captain can speak to the other captain. Everyone else just has to come into the room but sit quietly behind them, and isn't allowed to say anything, which is often quite funny. They're not meant to give away any kind of facial expressions or anything like that, but often do, and so that makes it quite an interesting dynamic that everyone else is in the room. And within that, they've got 5 minutes to prepare and 5 minutes to hold the conference. As I said, in most of my experience, they have always taken up the conference, but if they don't, what you'll have is a little bit more time there for a debrief at the end. So just have a think about how you can use that and how that might work. But if one of your teams decides not to have a conference for whatever reason. The other key rule in terms of logistics is that in round 2, 6, and 10, there's the opportunity to win big, so to get more points. So as you can see here in round 3, your score for that round will be doubled. So the really key thing to realise here is that obviously if you're on -3, that will take you to -6, so that you will lose bigger as well. So if you get 3, you'd get 6, but if you lost 3, you'd get -6. That's quite important. In round 6, your score will be multiplied by 3, and in round 10, your score will be multiplied by 10. So in a second, I'm going to show you the scorecard you can use and how you could use that just to make scoring a lot easier. But the other thing to say is also chat to your PEMs and the team there on the day if you're feeling unconfident about scoring, and I'm sure someone will be able to help you as well. So don't worry too much about it. It's basically just keeping a running total of what everyone's scored. And I've worked with people before who found it quite useful to have a big number line just so they can do it really quickly. They can go from positive to negative, whichever way makes it easier. But broadly, just keeping a running total is how that works. So again, we want to spend kind of a bit more time on the debrief really. So I've gone through that quite quickly, but any questions on the logistics, anything anyone's a bit confused about?
Sarah, I've got a question. It's Sally.
Yeah,
Just on the slide we're looking at now, slide 3,
yeah.
the bottom line says the objective of the game is to win by accumulating the most number of positive points. It's a question kind of for you, Sarah, but my feeling is that we shouldn't have the word win in there because do you know what I mean? We shouldn't set it up as competing because actually we're looking at collaboration rather than team A beating team B.
Yeah.
But maybe you've got a view, Sarah. I'm just asking the question.
That is useful. I think I've actually seen it played with
in our fact note. Yeah, in our fact notes it actually says the objective of the game is to accumulate the most number of positive points, which positions it actually as non-competitive, which I would suggest would be where you want to be. But I'm just putting it out there.
Okay. No, that is actually really useful. I will. I'll change that on that slide. Definitely. That's a good point.
I think it shouldn't be set. Yeah, I think it shouldn't be set up as a competition.
Okay, great. That's very sensible. Eileen has just asked a question on the chat which says, do teams put a chosen number of balls in the cylinder? If I've understood that correctly, I think that basically the answer is no. So they'll put one ball for each round. So in round 1, they'll say, okay, I've chosen red or I've chosen blue. They'll put that ball into the cylinder just to show that that's what they've chosen, and so they can't change their mind. And then we'll say, okay, and then in the second game, they'll then choose a second ball. So then you'll be able to see as well in the cylinder kind of how the teams have played. So you could see that they've played blue for the first 5, and then they decided to play red in round 6 when it cost more, and then they've played blue again. I hope that answers your question, Eileen, but do just let me know if it doesn't. Okay. And the last thing I was just going to show you was what we've put on the slide to hopefully make your lives a bit easier if you've got a computer and a slide deck in your room, which is this slide, which is a scorecard, which basically automatically will sort your scoring out for you. So what you have to do is you'll have to press escape so that it goes back into PowerPoint. So just like this. And then you can double click into the table. My computer's slightly slow at the moment, but then you can just choose that team A has scored this and team B has scored that, and it will actually just do all your adding up for you, and it will do all the multiplication and everything. So if you've got access to that, great. I know because of venues and stuff, some people might not have a room with a computer in, but it's something that's there for you if you've got the opportunity. So do just practice that before the session starts as well, because it will just make your life slightly easier. It means you have to do a little bit less maths, which I think for most people is probably a good thing. So again, I can pause quickly for questions in terms of if there's anything.
Sorry, I have a
yeah,
question.
Go on. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. On the previous slide, it said that it was double points in round 3, but then on the scorecard, it's in round 2.
No,
does it matter which it is?
Yeah, it does. I'll change it. That's fine. Change. It's in round 2. I'll just change it on that first slide and recirculate.
Okay.
Well raised.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, well, if you've got any more questions, we can always come back to them at the end in terms of logistics and how to play the game. But I know there's a few people that probably haven't run debriefs of this kind of thing before. So Sally was just going to talk through kind of how to observe what's going on and also how to debrief. So I'll hand over to Sally.
Okay, so I'm also working with the facilitator notes now. So we've got some observation guide for facilitators. So I guess for me it's about trying to step back when you're observing as much as you can. Obviously you're not there to be asked asking or answering questions at this point. You'll be looking at things like the communication. You'll be looking for leaders, for leadership behaviors, leadership styles. You might be looking for signs of conflict within the group. You will be looking at signs of followship as opposed to leadership. I'm a note taker, so I love to take as many notes as I can. That's completely up to you, but I certainly find the note taking very, very useful as part of the debrief. And I think what's also interesting to observe is the loss of trust and what happens when the other team are playing to kind of sabotage. What happens to the group? What kind of what kind of things do they perceive? How would their behaviours change? So I think the notes are quite comprehensive. Any of you who have done this kind of thing before, you'll fall into your own default style to do this. But I think, as it says, every group is different. Some may be very agreeable, some may not. It absolutely will depend on the group you're seeing, and your job there will be to observe and record accurately. But any questions on that for me? No, all okay on observation then? Yeah. Okay, I was just going to move then into the actual debrief. And again, you'll have your own style, I think, of doing this. When I last did it, we had a large open circle with both groups. We had one group, I think, on the right-hand side and the other group on the left hand. Quite an open space for people to feel comfortable to talk in. I guess the important thing here, the first thing, is to contract, because there may be a real range of emotion in the room. So I would, as we normally do, just write up some contracting words in terms of engagement, confidentiality to them, if they want to add any more. I tend to find in these types of debrief, it's nice to break the ice by asking them a question and then asking them to discuss it with a partner next door to them. So maybe something like, what was your role within the team? So just something quite easy, or were you a leader or a follower, or just an open question. And from there, I would then debrief out. So who wants to kick us off? What kind of feedback are you getting? As you'll know, with debrief, often they kind of slightly take a life of their own, because it depends what comes out from the fellows in terms of where the debrief goes. I think what I would have in my head is we're looking at team in this challenge day. So anything to do with team for me is going to be the right direction. So what kind of team player were you? What worked in your team to make it an effective team? Describe the communication, etc., etc. So those would be my follow-on questions to draw out the fellows' reflections of what happened in the exercise. But it is impossible to script it, as you'll know, because it does depend on where it goes. I tend to write down 6 or 8 core questions on a pad, so that I think if I'm getting nervous or anxious, I know I have the question to put forward. And I'm not sure, there's lots and lots of notes on the fact notes. I don't know if there's anything else to add, so I don't know if any questions about debrief.
I might just add one thing, Sally, which I think is quite key, especially with this group in debriefs, is being able to help them apply it to their own contexts within that session. So in a few that I've seen before, there's been things like some groups have really they felt like they've worked incredibly well as a team, and they were like, oh yeah, we were really happy with our performance, but they didn't work very well with the other group. They kind of discounted them, didn't pay them much attention, and then just getting them to think about, okay, so how does that work in your school? Is it that your department might well be quite high performing, but how much are you supporting other departments? That kind of question, just making sure that they are applying it, so that it's not just, because it is a really fun activity actually, and they tend to get quite competitive and enjoy themselves, but just making sure it's really crucial to use that debrief to be able to apply it to what they can take away and learn. So just trying to also do that at the same time.
And you're absolutely right, Sarah. And the last time I did it, in fact, it just flows throughout the debrief. In fact, there probably wouldn't be 2 or 3 minutes pass without me saying, so what does that mean for you at school? What does that mean for your team? So you're absolutely right. It should be littered with reference back to school. Yeah.
Yeah. Has
any questions or anything else on that? How are you all feeling?
You are all able to speak. I think we should be able to hear you as well. No particular thoughts? Okay.
Can we definitely? Can everyone hear us?
Yes, certainly.
Great. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Darren, I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Thanks, Darren. Okay. Okay then. Well, if no one's got any further questions, we can leave it there. But I mean, do just get in touch with us if there's anything else you think of a bit later. And you'll be met on the. So I think within each region, everyone's got slightly different kind of room setups and stuff. So you'll meet with your regional teams when you get there, and they'll just talk you through how it will work kind of physically on the day. And then that's it really. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope it was useful, and just let us know if you've got any more questions. Okay. All right. Well, I'll end the webinar there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.